can we think of a politician in our lifetimes that had as much of a movement behind him as Bernie Sanders does? Obviously the first guy I think of is Obama.
Yeah, I think of Obama.
Yeah, but
he had some big rallies.
No, he had huge rallies, and so I'm not taking that away from him. But maybe I'm looking at it too much from the current day's goggles, but it seemed to me that back then that was an enormously popular politician as opposed to a more fundamental movement that exists with or without the politician. Because Obama was such a dynamic politician, there's an argument to be made that Bernie Sanders is not a dynamic politician, but that he happens to be the right guy at the right time. In fact, part of why they like him is because he's not a politician. He's just like a grumpy old guy who's been saying the same thing for 40 years.
I think Obama's language was intentionally tapping into the same thing. It wasn't the same language, but its intent was the same. The target was the same.
I think you have to compare the two. I think Obama's movement was unlike anything we had seen. We said it then. That was, in the 8 years since, think of what Twitter has become in that time. So you have this echo chamber that you didn't have with Obama, that speaks even more highly of the movement that he had behind him and the game changer that he was. And he beat the establishment politician. Whatever you think of the president today and how he's been president, we can differ about that. Whatever you think of him today, at that point, he was the refreshing new thing in somewhat the same way that Bernie Sanders is, without the one note that Sanders has carried so well.
So the thing that I think is really interesting about Bernie Sanders, though, is what Cenk just mentioned about him not appearing to be a dynamic politician, right? So he's not as polished as Obama was. Obama was super polished, an incredible speaker. He just looked very clean cut and perfect every time he was speaking. But his message also did resonate. What's amazing about Bernie Sanders is he doesn't have the benefits of appearing to be a polished politician or a dynamic politician, but his message is so much stronger, I think, that it somehow is able to, give him a pass for not appearing dynamic.
Yeah, it's more specific anyway than Obama's was. So in that way, it's strong. But I would also say that the first black president of America couldn't have been a grumpy old black man, and
right.
so that had to be a more polished politician.
Wrangle, perhaps.
Right.
Even though it was the wrong thing to say, in some ways, when Biden said about Obama at the time, he's so clean and articulate. Like, it's such a classic Biden mistake to say that, right? But in some ways, we understand what he was saying is that this guy had to be safe enough for whites to vote for.
That's right.
And which is an unfortunate thing. Bernie isn't. He barrels into things, right? And the speeches, I've talked about this before, his consultants have told him not to do those speeches, that they're way too long, that they, that if you're going to do it,
but they vary so much.
and there's a certain way and a certain cadence and a certain timing. And Bernie Sanders looks at it and goes, "Oh, that's a really interesting idea." Crumples it up and throws it in the garbage. He's like, "I know. I'm going to go tell people what I actually think."
Yes. Yeah.
And that is why I think his movement is actually much stronger than Obama's movement was. So there's a number of factors.
Yeah.
One is the time, right? People are more frustrated than they were 8 years ago, matter at the establishment. Two, to Michael's point, Obama was so much vaguer, right? He was change, whatever you want it to mean. Right.
It seemed specific enough at the time.
Well,
I don't remember thinking.
He was specific about a lot of things.
He was, but it was
not
Reagan-esque. It was Reagan-esque. It was a bigger metaphoric idea that he was able to carry against the establishment. Also, you have to remember, the president that he was running against was far less popular at the end of his presidency. He was running against that administration that had a terrible record, and so it was far less popular than even the Obama record is among Democrats today and the country.
And they're not really independent variables. Like, you can't just say, oh, Bernie's movement, Obama's movement. Bernie's movement very likely has been influenced by Obama's movement. I'm sure a lot of people, I can only speak for myself, felt like, yes, Obama, he's going to do everything. He's going to he's going to do some things, I guess. And then you realize that you were maybe somewhat misled a little bit, and then the next person comes along who's more specific, has more of a history to prove that they mean what they say.
Right.
And then you're like, oh shit, no, that's the real thing. And so I think that there's probably a lot of young people who were only barely of voting age during Obama's time.
It's also the messenger, though. I mean, let's go back to what we were talking about with Bernie. I mean, if you put Martin O'Malley and Bernie Sanders side by side, and you didn't hear them or look at them, they would be essentially the same candidate. And this frustrated a lot of O'Malley supporters who wanted to really beat Hillary Clinton and be the ones to beat Hillary Clinton. But when you had Martin O'Malley, this polished former governor, it didn't work, right?
Yeah.
For some reason, he was younger, he's handsome, he's more handsome than Bernie Sanders.
rolled up sleeves.
Apologies. He has rolled up sleeves, all of that. But so the telegenic part of him, and then it didn't work because of who he was. So there is a little bit of the nuance that goes with it.